Hello, my name is Sarah Tucker, and I'm the Chancellor for the West Virginia Council for Community and Technical College Education. I'm here today to talk with you about co-requisite reform in developmental education in the state of West Virginia. Before I get into what we did, let me talk to you about what the problem was. Several years ago, we started looking at our graduation rates, and we realized that our students in our community colleges weren't graduating at a rate that we thought was acceptable. So we followed the Achieving the Dream model, and we looked at a number of the indicators that Achieving the Dream suggests that you ought to look at. We looked at the performance of our students by gender, by race, by program, by GPA, and what we finally discovered was that the pot of students who weren't graduating, unsurprisingly, were those who came to college underprepared to start college, or those who were deemed to need developmental education. And in fact, what we found was that when we looked at our first-time freshman population, about 66% of our students across the state needed some form of developmental education when they began college. But when we looked at their graduation rates, only 13% were graduating. And I want to be very clear about that 13% number. That's graduating a community college after 6 years. It is a 6-year graduation rate of 13%. And we knew that there was no way that West Virginia could be successful, that our students would be successful if we didn't do something about this graduation rate and fixing whatever the problem was that was happening with developmental education. In West Virginia, our community colleges have been charged, as many community colleges across the country have been, with being the economic driver of our state, with being the colleges or the organizations that provide West Virginia's workforce. The vast majority of jobs in West Virginia are those jobs that require some form of middle skills. Those are the jobs that are opening, and we need to make sure that our people are retrained and retooled and able to take those jobs. And given our graduation rate of only 13%, we knew that we weren't doing a very good job of that, and that we weren't going to be able to meet our state's workforce needs unless we changed it. So what we did was that we pulled a group of key leaders within the state of West Virginia together to talk about how we can deal with this issue of developmental education and what reform perhaps we could do. And so we pulled together a group of all of the college presidents, of the chief academic affairs officers. We pulled together our developmental education deans. We pulled together our faculty members, and we started to show them the data. And an important part of this was making it very clear to them, particularly to the faculty and to the deans, that it was not that we thought that the faculty or the deans were doing a bad job teaching developmental education. In fact, it was quite the contrary. Students were passing their developmental education courses at a very high rate. The problem was that they weren't re-enrolling. So they would pass their first level of developmental math, for example, but they wouldn't necessarily come back for their second. Or if they came back for their second level, they wouldn't necessarily come back for their third, and they certainly didn't come back for a college-level math course. So it wasn't the problem that students were being unsuccessful in developmental ed or that our instructors were somehow doing a bad job of teaching the students. It was that there was some sort of stopping out problem that we were having with our students. We were losing them along the way. And that began to make some sense, because if you start thinking about your student population, if you think about a student who has historically done poorly in a subject area or has been marginalized by their access to education or has just generally had difficulty in math or English, and they come to your institution and on the first day they have to take an exam, and they don't understand the consequences of that exam, but that exam ends up meaning that, or their results on that exam end up meaning that they're going to need 4 semesters of a developmental education course, developmental mathematics, for example, or 3 semesters before they're ever able to pass their college-level math course. You can imagine how somebody who wants a 1-year certificate or a 2-year associate's degree would get frustrated by this situation, because they're spending what ought to have been their entire college career taking developmental courses before they're ever allowed to take a college-level course. So when we talked about this with our presidents and our academic affairs officers, deans and faculty, we asked them what they wanted to do. What did they think would be a good solution to the problem that we were having? And they decided that they wanted to form a developmental education task force. And that task force had 4 subcommittees. They formed a data subcommittee, a best practices subcommittee, a policy subcommittee, and a placement subcommittee. And each of those subcommittees investigated different areas of developmental education reform. And then they came back to us and they gave us suggestions at the system office about what they thought were reasonable changes going forward. And as part of that work, the best practices subcommittee came up with 3 or 4 different alternatives for what they thought at the time looked like it was being successful in the field of developmental education. One of those was corequisite reform, largely based upon Peter Adams's work in Baltimore County. We also were looking at modular developmental education courses, where we went strictly to competency-based developmental ed on a platform. Typically it was the Pearson platform to get students through developmental ed. We also looked at summer boot camps, which actually did prove and continue to prove to be quite successful with the adult population. They are less successful with recent high school graduates. And several other varieties of developmental education reform, including a stretch course where a student would take 1 year to complete a developmental course that had college-level content embedded in it, and a linked course where students would do 6 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 weeks of developmental ed, 6 weeks of college-level math or English. And after we got the data back on all of these various formats of developmental ed, what we found was that the one format that was by far the most successful was the corequisite redesign. And it just was leaps and bounds more successful than any of the other formats. And so in the fall of 2013, based on the data that we had collected over the course of the past few years, we issued a challenge to the colleges, and we said, we want you to go to full-scale corequisite reform by the fall of 2014. And I will tell you that we are a coordinating board. We are not a governing board. So we issued this challenge with absolutely no authority to do so. And we weren't really sure what we were going to find. We didn't know if colleges would meet the challenge or not. But as it turns out, they did. They made dramatic changes to the way that they were teaching developmental ed, and they all made a good faith effort to go to these full-scale corequisite courses. And our results have been fairly astounding. So the slide that you're looking at now is our results in English. You'll see that in that second column there that says traditional model, fall of 2011. This is sort of our benchmark year. This is before any reform began. This was our traditional sequence developmental ed course. And so what we have here are students who, when they enrolled as a first-time freshman, they needed developmental education English. After 2 years, 37% of those students ever passed a gateway English course at their institution, only 37%. Now, with the coreq model, 74% of the first-time freshmen who are coming in needing developmental English are completing their college-level English course in their very first semester at their community and technical college. So we've shortened the time from 2 years to 1 semester, and we've almost doubled the success rate. In math, our findings were even more powerful. We went from a 14% of our first-time freshmen ever passing college-level math after 2 years if they needed developmental ed, to 63% of students who need developmental math passing their college-level math course in their first year. I have said this before, and I will say it again. I'm a statistician. I have never seen statistics change that much over a 1-semester time period in higher education. These results are phenomenal, and they will, I am convinced, impact our retention rates. They're going to impact our graduation rates. I have just qualitative data rather from the institutions with instructors telling me how many more students they have how many more students they're retaining in their courses now, based upon this reform in developmental education. Their students are sticking through the program, and in large part it's because they're only having to take one of their most hated courses. They don't have to take 4 math courses anymore. They just get to take one, and it's the same content as the college level math course that they had always taken before. It's the exact same content. It's just that it's taught differently so that students have the supports that they need in order to be successful in that course. So if you would like me to come and talk with you about these reforms, I would be happy to. I can provide you with any number of answers, I hope, including how to respond to and leverage legislative pressure to guide reform, how to use data to make the case for developmental education reform, how to gain commitment across the state, widespread commitment, not just from leadership, but from those who are actually doing the work, how to accelerate the implementation process and scaling up process on your campuses. We've stubbed our toes quite a few times, and I can help you figure out how not to stub yours. And any of the other issues that you see here on the slide, I would be happy to help you with. So I wish you all luck in your reform efforts, and I hope to see you soon.